Good morning, my name is Christian Rgoler and I have the pleasure to interview Davydd Greenwood, who is Goldwin Smith Professor of Anthropology Emeritus at Cornell University. Thank you for taking the time, Davydd.
My pleasure.
We're here today at the University Futures conference from the UNIKE project at Aarhus University. And the first question I would like to ask you, Davydd, is about which key trends in higher education you see currently and what challenges they might constitute.
Well, you have a wide choice of trends, but among the ones that concern me the most are the reduction of education, in a broad sense of the term education, to training. Basically the reconversion of education into vocational training, which was not the purpose of universities to begin with. And so the challenge is how to address that, because it's a very broad trend. It has lots of support. And the only way I can see to do that is to reaffirm Bildung as a university education and not to provide university degrees for people who are simply being trained. It's not that there isn't training in universities, there is, but training occurs in the context of a broader educational mission. And I think that's been lost sight of. So that's one of the trends. Another one is meritocracy. And it's meritocracy for everybody. The students are subjected to meritocratic criteria, the faculty are, the staff are, the administrators are, each one running to climb a ladder in treating everybody else in their category as a competitor and all the other stakeholders as potential adversaries, which creates an environment in which people don't cooperate, they hide information from each other, and they treat each other with disrespect, fear. It also makes people feel like imposters in their own roles, because fighting and struggling so hard in a competitive arena and trying to win is not the same thing as trying to figure out who you are and what you're trying to accomplish with your life. So I think meritocracy is another. Lonnie Guinier has written a book recently called The Tyranny of Meritocracy, and I think she's got at least the right title. And finally, I would emphasize this pseudo is very important, conversion of universities into financial institutions, aimed at making a profit for external stakeholders and even exporting the profits abroad. These are institutions paid for by the public at taxpayer expense, and their resources are being stripped away, all claiming to be a good business model. It's not a business model at all. It's literally an expropriation model. And to meet that challenge is to reveal that game and get the taxpayers to reclaim their resources as theirs and not belonging to external business elites in the global system.
In that regard, I remember that you made a very interesting comment once, last year actually, in Porto, about that universities are transformed according to business logics, but to a very particular kind of business logic. Could you please elaborate a bit on that?
Well, people use the term corporatization or business model really frequently now to talk about what's wrong with universities. And I think that's based on not really knowing much about business. Because a business model, for most successful businesses, is a model where the product is clear, the structure is efficient, there are relatively few high-level managers, there are team organizations to produce products, people who collaborate with one another, quality control is built into the structure. What we have in universities is a simulacrum of a business which is really based on predatory Wall Street brokerage firms and investment banks, in which basically they're stripping resources from whatever organizations they run and handing them over to external constituencies. That's not a business model, it's basically a predatory finance model. And finance and business are not the same thing. So I think I'm perfectly happy with a good business model, because a good business model means that you're producing something of value that works in the market. You're producing it according to good criteria at good quality. What's wrong with that? But you don't have 1,000 senior managers taking enormous salaries while the workers struggle at the bottom of the system.
So if I understood you right, the problem is not so much that universities try to function according to a business model, but to what sort of business model?
They're using a fake business model as a justification for stripping resources from the university and handing them over to other people.
And one more question. You made a very interesting comment in one book where you published in Bright Satanic Males, where you said that nowhere else in the university do we find such hermetic, discipline-dominated and self-regarding behavior as in the conventional social sciences. And now I'm really interested because this is one of the few critical notions I found in the literature about the position and the function of social sciences, and how you think this corresponds on the one hand to the self-ascription of social sciences to being the critical conscience of society, and how this also changes now in times where there's more stress put by funding agencies on interdisciplinarity and applicability of research.
That's a big question. It's too long to answer, perhaps. So the short answer is that I think that the social sciences, the idea of critical social sciences is a fraud. There are some examples. I mean, you do have people practicing political economy. You do have various kinds of critical social science, including people coming out of the Frankfurt School and people coming out of the Foucauldian tradition and so on. But the core disciplinary associations, the American Sociological Association, the American Economics Association, the American Anthropological Association, are passive, politically passive lapdogs of the system, working according to meritocratic criteria and enforcing market logics on their constituencies. Now, it's not an accident that this happened. Political economy was domesticated in the 19th century into the social sciences that we know now by dividing them up and basically taking the integrated critique of the social system and the political system and piecing it out into political science and dividing it up in such a way that you couldn't possibly understand it in critical terms. And the few people who then practiced critical social science in the 1950s were purged from the system by the McCarthy era in the United States. And I don't know how the purges worked in Europe, but it's true that most critical voices were demolished. And so the system of the current social sciences is nothing but a decision support mechanism for the existing structure, or simply irrelevant. I mean, people talking to each other about each other's work. But you know, if you practice critical social science in the United States at this point, you become branded. You don't get grants. You don't get disciplinary rewards. You get in trouble. Your dean may come to visit you and say that you're talking about things that you shouldn't be talking about because you put the university brand in danger.
So if I understood you correctly, what you're saying in a way is that social sciences are not necessarily critical, but they're at the same time not very applicable, because one option would be, instead of being critical, that you're instrumental.
Yes.
But what you're saying, if I understood you correctly, is that they're more instrumental to themselves, to their own disciplinary logic, than to...
That's exactly right.
To
That's right. And historically, I mean, you'd have to do the history in Europe because it's a different history. The history in the United States was that people who wanted to continue on a pro-social applied path of some sort, even if it was not politically very critical, had to found a separate association, the Society for Applied Anthropology, and broke away from the American Anthropological Association because the American Anthropological Association said that applied work was an intellectual dead end. And they won that battle in academia, so that unless you do theoretical work, you are very unlikely to get tenure at an American university in anthropology.
Do you think this will change in the next decade or so with the stress of policymakers for interdisciplinarity and more applicable knowledge?
Right now, it's the pressure is very high to do just what you say, but the fact that the pressure is so high doesn't mean that anything meaningful is happening. You have a lot of people making a decent living doing applied anthropology, and you have a lot of non-applied anthropologists defending their silo and their bunker, you know, like the last survivors at a siege. And in the process losing their positions. I mean, they're becoming occasionalized. lifetime tenure is down to 29% in the US, the faculty, so almost all the faculty in the next generation are going to be on term contracts. And those people are likely to find pressures to go out and do work that the public wants done or that companies want done. And so, but it won't gain intellectual prestige. I mean, the academic social scientists have defined that kind of work as an intellectual garbage can. And so I don't see that changing anytime soon.
So it sounds to me as if this would put an enormous pressure on academics, on these following the next generation of academics, because on the one hand, if they want to be academics at the university, what you're saying is that they have to do discipline-oriented research, theory-driven research, but on the other hand, to get funding, because they don't have tenured positions, they need to do more applied research. So there seems to be a tension.
Yeah, you're right. It's contradictory. I mean, but what you have is, the tenure and promotion guidelines for a faculty member very often say you should teach well, you should do excellent research, you should do service to the university, and you should do community service of some sort that's meaningful. And if you do anything but research, you don't get tenure. And so the people live this contradiction all the time. They have to do these things, but they know that only one of them counts. So until the guideline changes, until the tenure and promotion guideline changes, it's very difficult to get people to change their behavior because they've learned.
And as a concluding remark, so to say, do you have any advice for aspiring academics, particularly in the social sciences or in anthropology, who want to embark on the journey of becoming an academic at a university, how to negotiate these tensions? I
think as individuals, I don't think you can. I think it requires a social movement. I honestly don't think that as individual entrepreneurs, you have a chance. And I quit taking, before I retired, 10 years before I retired, I had 148 PhD students over my career. And before I retired, 10 years before, I quit taking PhD students because I didn't see that they had any future in academia. Young people that I liked, who I thought were intelligent, I thought this was a very bad idea. When I began to see some of the best students I had being unable to get positions in academia. So the good news is the system is so bad and it is so offensive for so many people that there's ample energy for change. It's bad for the young students. It's bad for the senior faculty. It's bad for the staff. It's bad for the administrators. Nobody except the very pinnacle of the system wins in this game. And when you have that many people having such a bad time, you've got a group of people who could be convinced to change it.
Well, let's hope you're right. Thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
It was very interesting.
Thanks for the interview and thanks for the good questions.